Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada and with the support of Omnovos, Canada's digital customer engagement company. Omnovos makes personalization easy by helping you engage the right customer at the right content at the right time. Find out how you can get started quickly and affordably so you can focus on doing what matters most, driving revenue and margin growth at www.realcustomerengagement.com. This episode is also sponsored by Rewe, real-time interactive worldwide intelligence. Visit riwi.com to learn more. In what is now an annual tradition for the podcast, in this bonus episode, I talk to retail thought leaders to explore one of the most important days in the retail calendar, Black Friday. First up, I welcome back Deciem CEO Nicola Kilner, who lets us know that they are hitting the pause button in order to move the world forward, boycotting Black Friday, no longer feeling comfortable participating in a holiday so focused on hyper-consumerism that leaves such a negative impact on our Earth. Next, I assembled a top panel of thought leaders to discuss Black Friday strategy, featuring best-selling author and my partner in the Remarkable Retail podcast, Steve Dennis, and veteran retail CMOs Karen Stirling and Ann Donohoe for a lively and wide-ranging discussion and debate. But first, let's hear from Nicola from Deciem. Nicola, welcome back to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
Thank you for having me back. I am doing very well. Just enjoying my time at home in the new world.
You know, for those who didn't perhaps catch our first conversation together earlier in the spring and may not know as much about Deciem as I do, give us an overview of the business and a bit about yourself and your role there.
So Deciem is the abnormal beauty company, and we really focus on functional beauty products, but mainly around skincare. And Deciem comes from the Latin word for the number 10 because it was all about building 10 brands at once. But the brand that we're probably the most well known for is The Ordinary, which launched 4 years ago now, with a philosophy of bringing transparency to the world of skincare and beauty. And my role is CEO. I've been at Deciem since 2013, so since the founding year. And I guess, well, I'm not always sure what a CEO does, but I like to think I try and keep everyone singing in the same tune.
Well, I've been watching your November YouTube series. It's a lot of fun. You're CEO/YouTube celebrity. So congratulations on that. You're doing a fun job. Well, listen, in one way, a lot has happened since we last spoke, and I think it was May. In another way, it's kind of like Groundhog Day again. We're kind of like back in the thick of disruption again, which has gotten probably not a surprise to many of us. But catch us up a little bit about how the summer was for the business. And, you know, you've got this global footprint, whether it's through your partners or your own brand store. So give us a sense of how the summer was and how business, just how things have evolved and how you're thinking about the business itself today for 2020. We'll talk about 2021 a bit later, but just catch us up a little bit.
Well, it's certainly been an interesting year. And I think like many companies and businesses around the world, when March and everything started to really peak, we were worried. We had a lot of unknowns. Like everyone, we weren't quite sure what was going to happen. But actually, we were very fortunate to probably be one of the businesses who have actually benefited somewhat from everything that's happened in 2020. So quite quickly, we saw our sales were already seeing strong growth, but suddenly there was an increased acceleration, which I think was driven from a few different parts. I think people having more time at home to research meant people were kind of taking more interest in learning about science, which obviously suits our brand. People taking more interest in looking after their skin, again, because maybe they have more time being at home, less need to wear makeup because they're not going out so much. So there was many different factors. Also partly because, most of our retail layout, we predominantly, especially early 2020, online is still our biggest channel. So bricks and mortar is still relatively small for us. So I think there were many factors that were in our favor. So from a demand perspective, it's been a very strong year. But that doesn't mean behind the scenes that we haven't had a significant number of challenges. And that's everything from supply chain distribution. So one of our products in The Ordinary, our caffeine solution at the moment, has a black dropper instead of a white dropper because obviously we started to get the impacts of different countries and where they were in the kind of pandemic. So obviously different components started to be in short supply. So we've had things from packaging, The biggest one, of course, is our team. So we very quickly made sure that all of our retail and production teams were given a choice in terms of what they wanted to do, so that they could stay at home and still receive 80% salary, or they could come in and have a premium. And actually, the premium we've paid out all of our production team, that's still in place now. What are we, 7-8 months in? And we don't see that ending until we're kind of through this. So we've really done everything we can to support our people. And I think, like many businesses in the beginning, it was, number one, let's make sure the business gets through this. Number two, let's make sure we preserve all jobs. And again, we're fortunate. We've been one of the companies that's been able to hire new talent into the business. And we take that responsibility seriously. We're fortunate to be growing. So actually, how can we kind of help others and help expand the team during a time where we know it's very difficult for roles? And again, with our retail roles, which is probably one of the industries that has been impacted the most, we've been very careful to preserve all retail roles and, quickly found a way to utilize all of that knowledge pool that the retail team have, but able them to work from home. And I think, what's been interesting with the global business, especially this time round, as we're kind of all facing different second waves, it's kind of seen it coming at different points. So obviously Europe started first with kind of lockdowns, and the UK followed. We're hearing that Toronto's likely to go into kind of full lockdown from tomorrow. So we're now planning around that. So it's kind of looking a bit more locally now as these kind of outbreaks come.
Well, you raise a couple of great, interesting points, and I've been hearing that from C-level executives. Supply chain, for example, is easier to stop than it is to start. Right in the early days, with so much uncertainty of the pandemic, lots of orders were canceled, and now 4 weeks later, they realized, oh my goodness, I need way more. But it was it's harder to get it going, and your black eyedropper substitution really brings that home. So, we're in that time of the year where retailers and brands, our thoughts turns to, the holiday retail season. And for many, their thoughts turn to Black Friday, Cyber Monday. These holidays have really been evolving. I've been watching them in the US side where they've, many brands, for example, have been closing physically on Thanksgiving. And in Canada, Black Friday, Cyber Monday is actually pretty new. Like 10 years ago, it didn't exist, right? It was Boxing Day. And so it's been evolving. Now, you've got a different approach, and that's not new, but I wanted to talk about that today because this is a special bonus episode just looking at the strategies around Black Friday, Cyber Monday. Of course, this year it's different. You can't do those door crashers anyway, but you've always had a bit of a different approach. Walk me through it.
Well, it's only actually in the last couple of years we have changed our approach. So going back to kind of the first few years of Deciem, we did what everyone else did. We did a huge discount on a few products just for the Cyber weekend. And it was only, I guess 3 years ago when we started to have a conversation around none of this makes sense. And I think it can be so easy for businesses and brands to just kind of fall into this trap. And when you step back and you think, why are we putting all of this strain onto one weekend, making people make rash decisions? Because ultimately, if something's on a discount for just a very short period of time, many of us have all been guilty before, I think, of panic buying. And the other challenge we were seeing was often retailers choose the products that they have the most stock of, which maybe are the slow sellers that they want to kind of shift out the door. And ultimately, if someone is buying a product just because it's discounted, especially in functional beauty, you can guarantee they're probably not buying the right product for them. And if they're not buying the right product for them, well, firstly, that's one of the biggest challenges around sustainability and what's happening in the world with so much consumerism. But secondly, you're never going to get a loyal customer. If they're not getting the right product, then they won't have a good brand experience and they won't become a customer that we retain over time. And of course, all the stress that we put on our own team by making that weekend, do the volume that a month could do, that puts a lot of strain on our supply chain teams and various other teams too. So we said, actually, how do we balance the fact that people are now used to November being a shopping moment in the year? And, it's a time where people do maybe want to save some money because it's expensive, probably the most expensive time of the year. And so that's how we came up with this approach of saying, actually, let's do a smaller discount, but across the entire brand. So every single product is included, and let's do it for the whole month. So actually no one is doing a rush purchase. People have time to look, to get advice, to talk to, some of our skincare consultants and build a regimen that's right for them. And then make that conscious decision so we can be more confident that they are getting the products that are right for them, whilst also easing some of the strain that we had put on our team members in previous years. So last year was the first year we did it, and we had an amazing reaction. And we know we gained a lot of loyal consumers. We know customers were getting the right products. They weren't just buying things for the sake of it because there was some huge discount. And it just felt, when something just clicks, and it actually just felt like we'd done the right thing for our business, for our team, and for our audience.
Well, I was going to say it really connects with your values in a number of different ways, but it also connects with your brand, right? As in just what you're saying about, we're not about buy anything, we're about buy the right thing for you. I mean, and it is a debate. It's interesting because it's a debate here in Canada, because some would say, I wish it never happened. And it's a bit like toothpaste out of the tube, because in one way, the overall retail sales annually just haven't gone up. They've been more concentrated and pulled into November. But this is the debate in the industry from a day-to-day debate. So it's really interesting you add this kind of extra dynamic to it. And I love the idea that you found you minted new customers who found you not just in the kind of days of November, but had the time to consider it the brand, right? That's what I'm hearing. Yeah. Yeah.
And we gained loyal customers because they bought the products that were right for them and for their skin.
Well, let's talk about 2021. I mean, we're almost at the end of what was a crazy year, and the COVID era is, as you said, we're not done with it yet. Could last for a little bit longer. I interviewed an author, Rashad Tobacco-Wali. He's got a great book, The Soul of Business, putting the business, taking it away from pure analytics and getting back to brand and story and a mix of the two. And he says, I think there's use a golfing term, like a 6-month mulligan for brands and retailers in the first half of 2021. How are you approaching 2021, knowing what you now know? How are you thinking about 2021 for your business?
I mean, I guess the one thing that I think has always been a principle of Deciem's is just to be adaptable. And I think that was one of the reasons why we managed to, fairly successfully get through 2020 was because actually we didn't have some lockdown plan that we were rigid to. We managed to kind of change with the times. And I think, that's definitely our approach going into 2021 as well, because if 2020 taught us anything, it's that you can't predict anything. Right. I think everyone who had a strategy for 2020 probably ripped it up halfway through the year and kind of tried to rewrite the plan. So I think really just going in again with that open mind around, fingers crossed there's going to be this vaccine rollout and we can kind of start to get life. But it's not going to be back to normal. And I think it's a thing that none of us really know yet. But actually, even the world of business travel, what's that going to look like when we can travel again and everyone's got used to doing things more virtually? And I think people's balance between work and life has changed over the last year. And that's something that I think won't just go back to people wanting to do long commutes and spending all this time away from the home again if they don't have to. So I think whilst we'll get back to a world where COVID it won't ever probably be eradicated, but it at least will be under control. But I think for me, the area which is too hard to predict at the moment is what the future kind of human behaviors will look like. And I think that's why it's still best to go in with this kind of open mindset, because, whether many people go back to the offices or not, it's going to depend where high street retail gets back, because if there's no offices full in those kind of busy high street locations, then retail might have to change to more communities and more actually kind of neighborhoods where homes are. But I think a lot of that is still too hard to predict. And so I think for us, it's still just keeping this kind of open mind and, believing in our own principles, our own values, doing what's right for us, and just being flexible depending on how humans come back after such a huge life-changing year.
Talking to a lot of people for the podcasts, and the general assessment, for as much as anybody knows, is in the fullness of time, based on the things you're saying about lifestyle and and where and how people work and how efficient they found it or how much they hated it working at home, it's the best guess right now is about 2/3 of people will return back to offices on an ongoing basis, which means it leaves a very intriguing question. If 1/3 of people aren't going to downtowns or high streets or wherever they work, is it e-commerce or are they going to shop more locally? And I guess that's one of the things that literally the $1 billion question, right? What's structurally different versus what's tactically different? And that must roll into your planning as well, yeah?
Well, indeed, but I think rather than plan for it, we're just keeping an open mind and keep doing what's right for us, and then we'll see how all of the human behaviors adapt.
So if you mentioned your team and some great work you're doing with your team, if 2020 was the year of figuring out and ensuring to keep people safe, it feels to me like 2021 is keeping people sane. It's been a turbulent time and will continue. How are you thinking about that for your people? Anything incremental to what you're doing today as we get into the long haul of this COVID era?
Well, for those who have followed the journey of Deciem, they will know mental health is very close to our hearts. With what we went through in 2018. So I think since then, there's many things we've introduced, for mental health days. We've just introduced even more personal days that people can take to kind of focus around mental health, as well as our Hugs program, which has got amazing resources for the team. But I think we also want to go one step further and actually continue whilst I think we are in a good place looking after our colleagues, but actually how do we look after communities too? Because there are some people out there who might not be fortunate enough to have a caring workplace or maybe a caring family or kind of whoever that support network is around them. So I think that's something we want to focus on, is how do we use our good to help more than just our own people.
Great conversation. Thanks again so much for taking time to chat with me. Now, I can't have you on the mic without asking a few recommendations for the listeners out there. Everyone's thinking about maybe some gifts or thinking about themselves. What are you loving in your line today, other than your base flagships? What are you loving particularly today?
So at the moment, I'm loving our hair density serum, which is a serum you rub into your scalp, and it has all the nutrition your follicles need to give you the best hair that you can have. So that's definitely one of my staples. And whilst we've been working at home much more, our squalene cleanser is something so therapeutic, just massaging into the skin. And I find, sometimes it gets to midday, and depending on how the morning's been, there's something where it's almost just a reset to kind of go into the bathroom and kind of massage it into my face, rinse it away with warm water. So that's definitely a little luxury that I've got into from working from home, kind of a midday cleanse.
Well, Nicola, it's been such a treat to have the opportunity to speak with you again. It's so interesting, both strategically, philosophically, and the values, and such a great leader. So thanks again for making time in your busy day to speak with the Voice of Retail podcast. I wish you continued success and a safe time for you and your family.
Anytime. Thank you for having me, Michael.
Welcome, everyone, to the Voice of Retail podcast special edition. It's a bonus edition, Black Friday. And to this edition or this episode, I pulled together a great panel to just chat through some of the retail strategy. So why don't we kick it off? Why don't we jump right in? Introduce yourselves. Steve, why don't we start with you? And I'll ask the first question. Everybody tell us a couple of minutes about yourself. Steve, kick it off for us.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Michael. It's great to be able to join everyone. So I'm Steve Dennis. I've spent about 2/3 of my career in operating roles at retail and consumer brands, most recently as the Chief Strategy Officer and Head of Multi-Channel Marketing for the Neiman Marcus Group. But for the last several years, I've been out on my own as a strategy and innovation consultant, writer, and speaker. Earlier this year, I released a book called Remarkable Retail, and now I get to deal with Michael more than I care to on the Remarkable Retail podcast.
It's nice to hear your voice too, Steve. Karen, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm a marketing brand renovator, innovator, and transformer. And over the years, I've led 360 omnichannel innovation, digital transformation, and accelerated growth, most recently for iconic Canadian companies in the retail space, like the global entrepreneurial Yogenfrues, the proudly Canadian Giant Tiger stores, and the global direct-to-consumer startup, Inkbox Tattoos. Glad to be here.
Thank you and welcome. Anne, tell us about yourself.
Thank you, Michael, for having me. I'm Anne Donohoe. I was most recently the Chief Marketing Officer at MEC. So I was brought in to build the marketing and digital capabilities and really revitalize an iconic brand. So turning love into trust and driving demand across Canada. Prior to that, I spent 5 years in Asia with Interbrand, helping organizations strengthen their brands. And I also have deep experience in customer relationship marketing, even started in the romance business at Harlequin. So I think the red thread is really being that focus on the customer. And so now I'm consulting, helping companies strengthen their brands and their customer experiences.
Well, fantastic. Welcome. So I thought, what a great panel to pull together. And last year I did a panel on Black Friday. Of course, this year, like everything else, everything is a little bit different. Black Friday is, either elongated or skewed. We just heard from Nicola talking about their approach. So I wanted to get just such three great retail strategists and marketers on the podcast. Steve, why don't you jump in? Why don't we start with you as a retail strategist on this panel, and you are the one person sitting in the United States, the home of Black Friday, and that holiday's been evolving in the U.S. Of course, it came up to Canada plus or minus about 10 years ago. Give us a sense from your perspective about how the Black Friday / Cyber Monday weekend event is evolving and transforming in the U.S.
Sure. So, one, my perspective on Black Friday has always been that it is more of a story than an actual event. As you may know, it was created by the National Retail Federation as a media event and has kind of taken on a life of its own, I guess, over the last, whatever it is now, 20 years. So I think really what we've seen over the last few years generally has been that Black Friday has become a bit less important from a physical store sales perspective, while Cyber Monday has become more important overall. I think the primary reason for Black Friday becoming a bit less important, though it'll still probably be the biggest sales day of the year, even this year, is that more and more retailers were opening on Thanksgiving Day, the day before U.S. Thanksgiving, and that was tending to move some sales off of Black Friday. And then even more so, some of the deals were starting to be offered, in some cases, even a couple of weeks before Black Friday. So what had been historically clustered around the U.S. Thanksgiving Day weekend has been spread out over more days, essentially. So that tended to make Black Friday a bit less important in terms of the single day sales volume.
Karen, Black Friday is a pretty recent event in Canada. I remember you and I were talking about this back earlier in our career when Boxing Day was really the big event in Canada, and in some ways, half the community looked south with some envy and said, "Boy, it's nice to have a day that kicks off holiday shopping." But from your perspective, why do you think it's become so popular in Canada? Recent Retail Council of Canada research tells us that it's the number one shopped day of the three big hitters, Cyber Monday and Boxing Day. Why do you think Canadians adopted it or welcomed the holiday so enthusiastically?
I think, Michael, in the U.S., they really understood with Black Friday consumer needs much better than we got it with Boxing Day in Canada. With the timing of Black Friday, customers got what they wanted. They got the discounts before the holidays with enough time to ship versus Boxing Day, where you had to line up to get what's left over after your gifting season and holidays were over. If you ask me, sign me up for Black Friday and Cyber Monday well in advance of the holidays.
Right on. So really it was would you say it was filling an unmet need, that opportunity to have a big holiday for gifting? Because Boxing Day kind of performed also self-giving. So it just filled a big gap. Is that what you think happened?
I think it filled the gap, and the time frame of it was so ideal for customers pre the gift-giving season with enough time to ship prior to the holidays.
What do you think? And I just want to hang on that for a second because we both lived through it. It's recent, so it's an observation that you and I could have made 20 years ago. Why do you think it took so long for it to break here? Was it the okay, the mix of the exchange rate and watching customers cross the border to America? Like, was there some, in your mind, was there some pivot point or a point that just triggered a mass adoption?
I think it was also a reticence on the part of retailers to give up margin. The hope was that people would pay closer to full price or slightly discounted prior to the holidays, and then they could clear out inventory at Boxing Day time period and try and gain a more full margin pre the holiday season.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. The toothpaste out of the tube question around Black Friday and retail margins. And we've seen a variety of strategies around retailers, both in Canada and the US, from adopting full on, making it the anchor point to a promotional calendar for the year. And then not unlike Deciem, those who just decide we're going to give it all over a pass. And, where do you land in terms of a brand perspective on how you talk to your customers all year long and then gear up for a very promotional event? It doesn't seem to suit all brands, but it is an uncomfortable, geez, am I missing out on an opportunity, and how does it fit? Where do you land on that spot, and what lens do you look at that through?
Yeah. Well, and I came from, I was working with a retailer where we chose not to engage, and to Karen's point, focused on the full margin sales. But of course, this is a unique year, and there's additional pressures that are on retailers right now. I would say throughout the year, we need to look at the business through the lens of our customer, our brand, and our values. So, and you think of this time of year, there's a significant number of customers out there shopping. And so they're actively buying. And the question is, how do we want to show up during this time period? Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of big retailers who are going full tilt, on promotions, and their wow factor for their brand is to be able to offer that great value and quick delivery. And it works well for their brands if they're able to execute well. But I think it is interesting to see more and more brands, retailers focusing on their values and looking at ways to actually stand out from all this promotional clutter. I love what Deciem's doing. We also see retailers like IKEA promoting their sell-back programs. So we're kind of looking at brands redefining what it means to save. And so I think from a brand perspective, it's really important to think about what we want customers to remember about us. And this is an opportunity to create more of a differentiated experience.
You must look around and observe, as we all do, the interesting phenomenon where it's a retail holiday became everybody's holiday, like Black Friday events, from getting your oil changed to like everybody started to pile on to the Black Friday event. Do you think that's wise from a brand perspective? Because a lot of DTC brands in this game now as well. Do you think you'll see more adoption or of promotional activities like Black Friday, or do you think it's going to simmer down, this year and perhaps, I guess it's really the intersection of those two competing forces, right? It's been a tough year and need sales versus need to be true to the brand and need to be true to the customer ethos.
Yeah, and I think, when you have all the customers are out there shopping, naturally we all float up, whether or not we have major discounting. But this year is a tough year. And so it's easy to get caught up in the need to promote. But at the same time, it's a sea of promotional clutter. And whether or not that really helps you in terms of driving additional sales at strong, at good enough margins, that's a debate.
Steve, there's a lot of retailers who are taking the actual day off, and that's the one thing that always confused me a little bit. Such a big holiday in the United States that is Thanksgiving, but yet many people had to work on that holiday. But is it some kind of moral alignment of the work? I mean, this year's a bit of an anomaly, or is it something more fundamental going on? In other words, I can do a lot of sales anyway without the people in the store, so I get the best of both worlds. So in other words, is that a trend you think will accelerate, and how do you view that?
Well, I'm not sure. I think, this phenomenon of being open on Thursday on the Thanksgiving day is pretty recent, and a lot of retailers haven't been participating in it. So I think this year it seems a little bit unseemly to be open on Thanksgiving Day in light of the pandemic. And I also think because a lot fewer people are going to go to the store, to your point, they're not necessarily giving up all that much by being closed on Thanksgiving Day. And a few big retailers made that move, and then a lot followed. And that's one of the, I know this was kind of touched on earlier, but I think one of the real issues with Black Friday, Cyber Monday, any of this kind of promotional event is this idea that it's kind of a zero-sum game, that people are only going to spend so much for the holidays. So if we don't get it and get it first, then we lose it forever. So that, I think, has been driving the ever-moving earlier launch of these deals. Then we've got the overlay this year, which is a slightly different point, which is how, well, in some cases, there's limited supply of certain products because of supply chain disruption. So there's an overall pressure to try to get business done early because the product may not be available. And then the whole so-called Shipageddon issue of there may not be ability to get product delivered unless you buy it in the next week or so as a consumer. So I think there's a lot of factors going on that are pretty unique to the pandemic. And I think it remains to be seen. And, it's like a lot of these issues in business strategy, right? Is if Walmart or some other big player moves, then you feel compelled to keep pace. If they sit on the sidelines, then you're okay to sit on the sidelines. And it's, the proverbial race to the bottom in a lot of cases by continuing to up the ante. So I think it's a great thing that U.S. retailers aren't open on Thanksgiving Day. But my guess is next year, assuming, good remediation of the virus and so forth, we'll see many retailers make that move, and then many will feel like they have to follow.
And Steve, I guess that question becomes particularly acute when you look at events like Prime Day, where many retailers say, okay, do I let them have their day and stand aside, and by doing that, not reinforce that as a big event? Or do I just need to, it's back to this FOMO moment, do I need to, I think Target did in the US, they said, well, we're going to do Prime Day specials too, because we just don't want to lose out on those sales. I guess that's a real interesting question. In other words, how do you stay remarkable, to use your great words around being a remarkable retailer, when you're kind of following the pack some days by sometimes necessity or inclination, I guess?
Well, there's nothing remarkable about selling an identical product at a slightly lower price. Like that in and of itself is not, there's no business strategy there. I think, as was mentioned earlier, I do think there's a real kind of fork in the road from a branding standpoint. If you're the sort of brand that is more about selling widely available items at a low price, then you're mostly about transactions. And I think it makes a certain amount of sense to participate actively in an event like Black Friday or Cyber Monday. And in that case, you're using your store as a fulfillment point. You're not using your store as an experiential point. So if that's the sort of brand you are, I think participating actively in Black Friday, you almost have to. If you're the sort of brand, a more story experiential brand, then I'm not sure what Black Friday has to do with elevating your brand. You may feel like you need to do it because you have the inventory to sell. But I think there is a bit of fork in the road in terms of type of brand you are and the degree to which you should lean into Black Friday. So to me, it's not surprising that Patagonia or some of these other brands basically opt out and try to use that as an opportunity to build a more trusted relationship with their employees, or to elevate certain parts about their brand that are really distinctive, because they're not about efficiency and low price and transactions. They're about relationships and enduring trust.
And your history and talking to merchants and the kind of, those discussions, which can be pretty interesting, where there's this FOMO. In other words, boy, if we don't jump on this, some open to buy for the consumers could get sucked up, and there's risk there. So how, in your past, in your career, not to name any one retailer, but overall, as you think about this, how do you handle those discussions with the merchants who are charged with hitting the numbers, hitting the budgets?
Well, in my past life, we actually did not do promotions. We did clearance. And so, it was more around clearing inventory. And then we were creative in terms of providing additional offers to get people in the stores and to keep coming back. But we weren't necessarily caught in that game. It was more around, how early do you clear inventory? How quickly can you get discounts out there? I would say over the last few years, there was definitely more pressure and more conversation because of the FOMO elements of it. But it was really around the long game of the whole holiday season and thinking about how do we service our customers, our members in the best way possible and stay true to our values and our brand story. So, we were more of an experiential type of brand, and that was the focus point for us from a marketing perspective, rather than getting caught in that race from a pricing perspective.
As a retail CMO, if I gave you a magic wand and that magic wand could somehow put toothpaste back in the tube, in other words, Black Friday just goes away, and then merchants would go, great, so now I can sell the same amount of products. If you look at sales in Canada and to some degree in the US, the sales hasn't really gone up on an annual basis. It's just shifted around. That's particularly acute in Canada. So it hasn't actually increased sales. Would you wave that magic wand? Would you eliminate this distortion that some call it, this Black Friday event, or would you just say, listen, it's part of the canvas and let's optimize it?
Promotions are always, they're necessary tools to drive demand, clear inventory, but a one-day sale on some select items is a very different story than having months or sales going on for months long, and we're training consumers to purchase based on discounts, which reduces our ability to develop more deeper relationships with our customers. And ultimately, we have decreasing margins and customers end up paying less, but they're getting lower quality products and services. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation. So yes, like as Steve said, there's always going to be retailers that are focused on quick delivery, lower prices, large breadth of products. But it is really like for those more experiential brands, how do you differentiate? Because so many retailers are selling very similar products. How are you going to stand out? That's the question. And I think, yes, if I could turn back time, I think it's more around how do we get back to that? What's the value that we provide our customers and how can we differentiate ourselves?
Karen, I on the last the last interview I did on Black Friday, I had a professor from Ryerson University in Toronto, and he talked about price promotions and these kind of events as like the gamification of retail. He said it makes it exciting for consumers. How do you, as a retail marketer, generate excitement without promotions? Like, what's your toolkit? What's your advice to the retailers listening about saying, listen, you don't need this promotion all the time, but you can still generate excitement and interest in your brand and traffic, importantly, to your retailers?
It's interesting because I go back to some of the classics of branding and marketing, and just building on what Anne had to say, this is where your toolkit in terms of innovation, value add, VIP customer cultivation, scarcity, and value add relevance in terms of building great partnerships. And I can think of two really interesting examples recently in the Canadian marketplace. Hudson Bay recently did a partnership with the iconic Canadian Schitt's Creek brand, Catherine O'Hara and Annie Murphy, for their More Joy campaign. They integrated it not only in terms of their omni-channel, but in terms of their merchandising. This is where they created news, relevancy. They took a hot property and they integrated it in a relevant way for a Canadian consumer and created a buzz and made the brand more relevant, interesting, and engaging. So it wasn't necessarily we're going to discount 30% as part of a Black Friday, but we're going to make our brand more relevant for our customer in a way that's meaningful. And not just major players can take advantage of this kind of strong brand marketing. Another example is the entrepreneurial Inkbox Tattoo. They partnered with the iconic Canadian poet Rupi Kaur and created a limited edition gift box tattoo set with her poetry on it. And it was done in a very unique way to take her poetry into a new medium and in a relevant way for their target audience. Within a Canadian poet. And so small entrepreneurial startups can do this in a way that's relevant for their target audience, create meaning, create scarcity because it's a limited edition, and create that drive and demand for their brand. And so to me, this is the essentials of marketing, creating relevance, creating meaning, creating innovation for your product that's meaningful to your customer base. And that's going to drive excitement, it's going to drive immediacy, and it's going to create a buzz for your business.
Well, it's nice to see Hudson's Bay not doing a scratch and save for the holidays, that's for sure. A little bit of history there. Steve, last word to you. You and I have been talking about this issue for many episodes of our Remarkable Retail podcast. This whole great acceleration, a reset of retail. Is now the time as a strategist, as an industry, to reset any of the old ways and move forward? Is this a unique opportunity, or is it just going to be lost in the necessity of driving sales to really make sure everyone's employed and keep the business moving in very difficult times? Any sense as you think about this and other issues about a structural change pending for retail?
I don't think there'll be a structural change around Black Friday or Cyber Monday, just because I think retailers, we know who we are, right? I mean, there's certain things we can't help doing. I think when faced with competition or competitive pressures, when faced with inventory we're sitting on. So I think there's some underlying aspects that drive the behavior over this weekend that are not likely to go away. I think where we're seeing an acceleration that affects Black Friday and Cyber Monday is, as I often talk about, the blurring of the lines between physical and digital. And so one thing
you almost said physical there,
and I have to immediately sign off the podcast.
Well, we'd have to give a nickel to our friend at Lockheed.
Exactly. But going back to what I said about this being a media event, as much as we see, at least in the States, CNBC folks sitting in some mall outside of New York counting shopping bags to give us an early indication as to what sales will be, which to me is one of the most ridiculous things ever. The Black Friday has become a multi-channel, omni-channel, harmonized retail, whatever phenomenon anyway. This year, obviously, for safety reasons, lots of people aren't going to be going to physical stores, so they can just buy online. But that was happening anyway. So I think we'll continue to see more online penetration going forward. Certainly accelerated a lot this year, but continuing to grow. We're going to see, and I don't want to get into the whole definitional issue here, but there's going to be a lot of folks that will buy online and pick up at a store on Friday. Right, so it will be a Black Friday frenzy. It'll just be the frenzy will be at curbside, not necessarily at the cash wraps. So I think a lot of these trends will continue. But I think, at least in the States, having this day after a big holiday, the Thanksgiving holiday, just creates an opportunity for people to talk about it in terms of the media presence. But many people are off work and they're going to shop, whether they do that on their phone or their laptop, or actually go into a physical store next year when they feel much safer.
All right. Well, listen, Karen, Steve, Anne, this has been a great panel discussion. Really adds to the ongoing thought leadership around this important event. I want to thank you all for being on the Voice of Retail podcast, and it was a real pleasure listening to you and getting your perspective. So once again, stay safe. Thanks a lot. Stay safe, and I wish you a great Black Friday weekend of shopping. Well, thanks to Nicola, Steve, Karen, and Anne for being my guests in this episode, plus Omnovos and Riri for their support of this very special Black Friday bonus episode. If you like this podcast, please subscribe on Apple, Spotify, your favorite podcast platform, rate and review, and be sure to recommend to a friend or colleague in the retail industry. I'm Michael LeBlanc, founder and president of Emmy LeBlanc Company, Inc. You can learn more about me on www.meleblanc.co or, of course, on LinkedIn. Until next time, have a safe week.